No matter what you think of Apple, you do have to admit that the M1 Macs are seriously impressive bits of equipment. Besides being perhaps the first pro-ready ARM devices, they also redeem the Mac computers from being nothing but overpriced junk. In fact, they're so good that several people in the online FOSS space, myself included, have even decided to go out and get one. Now unfortunately the Linux port for M1 isn't ready yet, but while we wait for that, I thought, why not? Let's try out some FOSS games on the M1, right now, on the Linux Lounge. This video was sponsored by Oxygen. Breathe in to get yours today. So indeed, today we're going to be trying out some FOSS games on the M1 Mac. More specifically, I'm using an M1 iMac with 16GB of RAM and 8 GPU cores. All of these games are running under macOS Monterey, and unfortunately, most of them are still running through Apple's translation layer, Rosetta 2, which translates x86 instructions to ARM ones. This unfortunately introduces quite a significant performance penalty, but with that said, let's get on to testing some games. The first game that I decided to try is SuperTux. Now unfortunately, the current stable build of SuperTux actually crashes upon opening on M1 Macs. However, the nightly builds of this game actually work perfectly, even though they still run through a translation layer. And I have to say, seeing SuperTux running on an iMac screen at 4.5K is something that I never knew I needed. But I have to say, it's pretty glorious. Additionally, the game seems to work perfectly, and I was able to play through several levels using this build. Fantastic stuff. Next, I decided to try Openttd. Openttd is particularly impressive because it's one of the few games that runs natively on Apple Silicon. And just to clarify here, it's not only one of the few FOSS games that runs natively on Apple Silicon, it's actually one of the few games that runs natively on Apple Silicon generally. Unfortunately though, I can't comment much on this game, since I don't really know how to play it. But I did have a bit of a click around, and it seemed to work fairly well, even at 4.5K, which is pretty impressive. Next, I decided to try TWorld, which is another game that runs through a translation layer. But again, it seems to work really well even at 4.5K with the anti-aliasing turned all the way up, which is great because this is a great fun game. The only problem is that for some reason the vanilla game isn't very popular anymore, and instead most of the servers are more based around platforming, which is a shame, but if you can get together a group of people willing to play the vanilla game, you will have great fun with this title. Next, I decided to try a 3D shooter, Exaltatic. This is another game that runs non-natively, and for this title I did have to turn the graphic settings down a bit. For this game, I decided to run it at 1440p with the normal graphics preset, and I found that the game works at a completely playable frame rate with these settings. I'd be curious if you could compile a version of this game to run natively on the M1 and run at better graphics settings, but even the binary version of this game that's designed for x86 Macs runs perfectly here on the M1. Finally, I decided to try and run what may very well be my favourite FOSS game, SuperTux Kart. As you'd expect, this game also runs non-natively, but it does still run reasonably well. I decided to try running the game at 4K with the 3 graphics preset, and I found that it ran at a completely playable frame rate. Obviously running at 4K on this hardware is a little bit ridiculous, and if you're happy to run the game at a lower resolution, you can turn the graphic settings up a lot higher, maybe even run the game at the highest settings. But I just thought that to end this video, we needed the spectacle of SuperTux Kart running at 4K. So here it is. Pretty impressive, right? And with that said, that's it for today's video. As you can see, FOSS games run pretty well on the M1 Macs under macOS, even though most of them do run through a translation layer. Personally, I can't wait until Linux is in a better state on the M1, so I can run these games where they're best played. But with that said, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.